Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. With all eyes glued to Gaza right now, it's easy to miss some of the other things bubbling up around that region.
Right.
And today we're looking north of Israel.
Yep.
We're going to do a deep dive into Hezbollah. You've clearly been following this really closely.
I have.
And I really appreciate you sharing all that with us so we can really kind of dig in together and get past the headlines. It seems to me like you're looking for kind of a real nuanced understanding of who are these guys really?
Yeah.
What makes them tick and what role they might play in this whole situation that's unfolding right now. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's something that we need to look at really, really carefully.
Yeah. And we hear these labels thrown around, militant group, terrorist organization.
But, and while those might not be inaccurate, they don't really tell the whole story.
Yeah.
Like, these guys are also a political party.
Yeah, they are.
Deeply ingrained in Lebanon. They're running schools. They're running hospitals. They have social service programs.
Yeah.
Like, imagine, a group launching rocket attacks one day.
Right.
And then, handing out, bags of rice the next.
Yeah.
It's that complex.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's what makes it so fascinating to study, but also difficult for people to really get a grasp on. We come at this with our own, I think, inherent biases, whether it's, influenced by Western media or even people's own personal experiences in the region. But, it really colors the way that we approach trying to understand Hezbollah. So I think the most important thing that we need to do is kind of take a step back for a second and rewind the clock a bit.
Yeah, get some context here.
Get that historical context. Absolutely.
It's like trying to watch a movie and just starting from the middle. You're like, wait, how did these characters even get here?
Exactly.
So let's rewind.
Okay.
Let's go back to the 1970s in Lebanon. And already at this time, things aren't exactly peachy. You've got a lot of tension simmering between these different religious sects,
Right.
all vying for power. It's politically unstable.
Yeah.
You've got the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, operating within their borders, which is causing a whole lot of friction with their neighbor to the south.
Sure.
So it's kind of like this powder keg waiting for a spark.
Right.
And then, boom, 1979, Iranian Revolution,
Right.
enters Ayatollah Khomeini.
Yep.
And he's not exactly subtle, right? This is a guy who sees the United States as the great Satan. Yeah. And he believes his brand of Islamic revolution needs to go global.
It's his life's mission.
Yeah, and he's got a plan, right?
Yeah.
He sees Lebanon, and he sees opportunity. A country in turmoil, home to a large Shiite Muslim population, ripe for the picking.
And what's so fascinating about this, too, is just a few decades prior to that, Iran and Israel were actually allies.
Whoa.
But with Khomeini coming to power, this is like a complete 180. And so that's why this moment is so pivotal and so important.
Okay. So you've got Khomeini.
Yeah.
And he's not just looking to export some ideology.
Right.
He wants to build loyalty. So Iran recognizes, the plight of the Shiite communities in Lebanon.
Right, who oftentimes are neglected by their own government.
Yeah, they're marginalized, they're overlooked.
Yeah.
And Iran swoops in.
They do.
They offer financial aid.
Yep.
They give them educational resources, social services. They're building support from the ground up.
Absolutely.
Smart. So now fast forward to 1982. Big year. Israel, they're fed up with years of cross-border attacks.
Right.
The PLO is based in Lebanon,
Yeah.
and they launch a full-scale invasion.
They do.
And, as you can imagine, the impact on Lebanese civilians was devastating.
Absolutely. A very tumultuous time.
Yeah.
And it was within this context that Hezbollah really kind of rose from the ashes, if you will. So you have to remember that at this time, Lebanon is war-torn.
Yeah.
They're reeling from invasion, as you mentioned, from Israel. There's still this internal strife, and Iran sees this as an opportunity to establish a very powerful ally.
Right on their doorstep.
Right on Israel's border. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Proxy force. And that's really what Hezbollah is they're a proxy for a lot of Iran's regional ambitions.
And they get a lot of support.
Enormous support, both financially in their training and, of course, ideologically. Iran was very, very deliberate in how they went about doing that.
And they wasted no time.
No.
1982, same year as that invasion, Hezbollah comes out swinging. And I'm not talking about diplomacy. We're talking a devastating suicide bombing against Israeli forces entire.
Yeah.
And it sent a very, very clear message.
Absolutely. A message that they've repeated time and time again. They are not afraid to engage in, these very, very violent tactics to achieve their goals. And I think It's easy to look at a group like Hezbollah and simply say, oh, well, they're just interested in, resisting Israeli occupation.
Yeah.
But in their 1985 manifesto, they lay out their ultimate objective,
Which is?
the complete destruction of Israel. This document is essential reading for anyone that really wants to understand this group, their ideology, their worldview, and really the lengths to which they're willing to go to achieve their goals.
It's chilling stuff. I mean, this isn't just some strongly worded letter.
Right.
This is a declaration. They're playing for keeps.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then it gets even more complicated. So the Lebanese Civil War finally winds down, thankfully.
Right.
It ends in 1990, and there's this big push to disarm all these different factions that have been tearing the country apart.
Yeah, to bring some semblance of order and peace back to the country.
But then there's Hezbollah.
Right.
Different story. They get to keep their weapons.
They do, and this wasn't by accident.
Okay.
This is a calculated decision. Hezbollah, by this point, had become too powerful to disarm.
Really?
They had amassed significant popular support, especially among the Shiite community. And this was due in no small part to their social service work, the fact that they had been fighting against Israel. And they had really embedded themselves in Lebanese politics. I mean, they had become a force to be reckoned with.
So you're saying forcing them to disarm could have reignited the whole conflict?
Absolutely. It was a risk that many in Lebanon simply were not willing to take.
So they got a pass.
They did, while other groups had to relinquish their weapons.
That seems like a recipe for trouble down the road.
It certainly set the stage for Hezbollah to further consolidate their power and expand their influence, both within Lebanon and, as we'll get into, beyond.
Uh-oh. Okay, this is where things get interesting.
Oh, it's really interesting. Hezbollah, they weren't content with just laying low. I mean, they were building up their political position in Lebanon through elections and all social services, right? But at the same time, they were expanding their reach, like quietly, in the background.
Interesting.
Yeah, like so in the 1990s, you start seeing all these Hezbollah-linked attacks and activities all over the globe. We're talking bombings in Argentina. There were these thwarted plots in Europe and Asia. They were busy.
Yeah, I remember reading about that 1994 bombing, the AMIA Jewish Community Center in Buenos Aires.
Right.
That was awful. 85 people killed, hundreds injured.
It was a horrific attack, and it really, brought home for a lot of people that this was not just some local conflict, right?
You're right.
Hezbollah's ideology, their reach, it extended way beyond the Middle East.
Yeah, it showed their true global ambitions. And then, of course, there's 2006. Right.
The war with Israel.
Yeah.
I mean, that lasted over a month. Huge casualties on both sides.
Yeah.
How did that change Hezbollah, do you think?
Well, it was a real turning point for them. Yes, Lebanon was really damaged in that conflict, but Hezbollah came out of it, stronger.
How so?
They were seen as, standing up to Israel, not backing down. Especially in parts of the Arab world, there was this real sense that Hezbollah had held their own, even won in some ways.
Interesting.
It allowed them to really solidify this narrative of resistance, right, against this big bad Israel. And it really bolstered their support base at home and abroad.
Yeah.
Gave them legitimacy.
So we've talked about Iran, their global activities, their politics, but I keep coming back to this one question, how much of Hezbollah is really their own thing?
And how much is just Iran pulling the strings?
Yeah, it's a great question. $1 million question.
It's complicated, I'm sure.
It really is. I mean, there's no question Iran has been key to their rise. The money, the weapons, the shared ideology.
Yeah, seeing the U.S. and Israel as the enemy, right?
Exactly. But it's more nuanced than Iran just calling all the shots and Hezbollah following blindly.
Okay, so what's the real story then?
Hezbollah, they have their own goals,
Okay.
their own command structure, their own interests in Lebanon. They have to play the game politically to keep their position. And that means sometimes they have to distance themselves a little from Tehran.
So it's a balancing act.
All about balance,
Fascinating.
It is. They have to be pragmatic about it.
Right.
That old saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But even among friends, even close allies, there's always going to be some give and take, right? Some disagreements.
Sure.
So it's not always going to be smooth sailing.
One thing that really struck me is how much stronger Hezbollah has gotten militarily since that 2006 war. Some estimates say their arsenal of rockets and missiles has just exploded. We're talking going from something like 15,000 to over 100,000.
Yeah, it's a crazy increase.
How did that happen?
Well, they're patient
Yeah.
strategically right, and they're good at adapting. The Syrian Civil War was huge for them in this.
Right. Their involvement there. We haven't even gotten into that yet.
Yeah, well, that was like their training ground, basically. Testing their tactics, training new fighters, getting that real-world experience, which is invaluable. But maybe even more importantly, it gave them access to weapons, lots of weapons.
Coming from,
Iran, mostly.
yeah.
Sophisticated stuff.
So they've gone from like a guerrilla group focused on fighting Israel
Right.
to like a proper army, basically.
Basically. Battle-hardened, well-equipped, and that's what makes this whole situation right now so worrying.
Yeah, because if they decide to get involved in this conflict,
It's a whole different ball game now than it was back in 2006.
right, and that's the question, isn't it? Will they?
Right.
And if they do, what does that even look like?
Yeah. And it's not just theoretical anymore, right? Like
Yeah.
we've already seen those exchanges of fire across the border. Israel, Hezbollah, like that's a powder keg waiting to blow.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's understandable that the world is, focused on the humanitarian crisis that's unfolding in Gaza. Right.
But we really can't afford to ignore this other potential conflict brewing up north. And as we were talking about, Hezbollah is, much more serious threat than they were even 10 years ago.
So paint me a picture then. What happens if they decide to go all in?
Well, you're talking about a much bigger conflict geographically, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just going to be Israel and Hezbollah. It'll almost certainly drag in all of Lebanon.
Right.
And with the kind of firepower they have now, it could easily overshadow what we're seeing in Gaza. I mean, we're talking about massive civilian casualties, potentially widespread displacement. It could be a real humanitarian catastrophe.
It's interesting you say that because in the research, some of the sources mention that like people in northern Israel are already kind of bracing themselves for that possibility.
Oh, yeah. And in southern Lebanon, people are already fleeing their homes, right? Because they remember 2006. They don't want to go through that again. Yeah. No, it's heartbreaking. I mean, it's easy to get caught up in the politics and the military strategy of it all.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's people's lives that are at stake.
It is. And it really brings us to like this key question about Hezbollah's intentions, right? Like what role did they play, if any, in Hamas's initial attack? Were they involved in the planning, the execution?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the sources you shared, they actually offer a couple of different perspectives on that.
Oh, okay.
Like, on the one hand, you've got Hamas. And they've been very, very clear. They're denying any direct involvement from Hezbollah.
Which, I mean, strategically makes sense, I guess.
Right. I mean, it wouldn't look too good for them to admit they were coordinating with another group that's, widely seen as a terrorist organization.
Right.
But then, you've got other experts like Dr. Kashan. We talked about him earlier.
Yeah.
And he's basically saying there's no way Hamas would have even attempted something that this bold, this sophisticated,
Yeah.
without at least some help from their friends, some guidance, intelligence, maybe even logistical support.
So maybe Hezbollah is playing more of a behind the scenes role, right?
Could be.
Offering advice, maybe some weapons or training.
Yeah.
But not, actually sending their own fighters into battle. Not yet, anyway.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole situation so unpredictable.
Because they're just waiting.
Maybe. Waiting for the right moment to make their move.
And when would that be? Like, what are they waiting for?
Well, that's the big unknown, right? It could be a strategic calculation. If they sense that Israel's getting bogged down in Gaza,
Yeah.
or if they think that they could turn the tide of the conflict, if they intervene at just the right time.
Yeah, right.
Or it could be, more of a last resort. Like if they feel like Hamas is about to collapse and they have to step in and protect their own interest.
Wow. So many factors at play here. It's like we're watching this really high stakes chess match.
In a way, yeah. But the difference is this isn't a game, is it?
No.
The stakes are incredibly real.
They are. This has been an amazing deep dive. I gotta say, I feel like I learned a lot.
We do.
I also feel like we've uncovered even more questions than we've answered, to be honest.
Well, that's how it usually goes with Hezbollah. It's complicated. But sometimes just asking the right questions, that's just as valuable as having all the answers. Right?
Absolutely.
Understanding the nuances, all the different points of view, the potential consequences, both intended and unintended, that's what matters.
It is. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Hezbollah. I hope you found it informative, even though it does leave us with a lot to think about.
A lot to think about.
And as always, please keep learning, keep asking those tough questions, and stay informed as this situation continues to unfold.